The initiation of the survival horror genre gave birth to one of the greatest gaming experiences that continues to infatuate us to this day. But every diamond must endure some amount of pressure. I'm Saggy, and today I'll be discussing the worst parts of Resident Evil. Let's start off with something simple and unavoidable: the dialogue. No matter how you spin it, the voice acting is absolutely donkey nuts. And it's not even just a few lines, or just some of the most notorious clips that have circulated for years, but the entire game. Whenever a cutscene is about to start, you have to prepare for the literal worst. I will say that yes, it is so bad that it's good, but it does make it difficult to take any of the game seriously outside of the gameplay. We're supposed to be battle-hardened task force members in an environment that's so terrifying that you can see their fear as they back away from these strange creatures. But then you hear a conversation between Chris and Rebecca and have your immersion completely ruined. You might be a gamer that would rather cut this shit out altogether, but sorry to say, the cutscenes are indeed unskippable. Certainly not a deal breaker, but for sure is a reason some would rather play the remake. The OG is like many console releases at the time, where you would have to find a save point to keep your progress. However, this game takes it one step further. Usually you can save as much as you want, but here you absolutely need the ink ribbon item to save or say goodbye to your progress. This one change can make the game difficult, as you might use all your bullets and soft lock yourself, or even get stun locked by enemies. You might even use all your ink ribbons and put yourself in a mean pinch for an elongated period of time until you scavenge more. There are layers to the difficulty that aren't outright apparent, such as Jill having less health than Chris, making herbs much more valuable to her, or that Chris has more enemy encounters than Jill, making for a more strategic use of bullets necessary. If you play both, you'll see that Chris has less inventory space and gets no lockpick, making his pockets fill up quickly as you need to hold guns, ammo, and keys for unspecified doors and the like. Not to mention, depending on what version you play, you could see yourself needing to shoot enemies without any auto aim, which is an entirely different can of worms. Many of the hardships presented here are mostly due to a lack of knowledge, but once you know, you should be fine. Speaking of lack of knowledge, this game encourages you to learn it and replay to get the full experience. As the aforementioned stanza explained, both characters have different pros and cons, but they also provide different endings and cutscenes. Once you survive the horror of both Jill and Chris though, the game starts to lose its mystique. You know exactly what to do and how to handle situations, so it's almost as if you're speedrunning at times. Nothing is going to catch you off guard because you already know the hunters are coming, or that Barry will burn Plant 42 for you. And if you're a real aficionado of the game, you can unlock weapons that will trivialize the game even further. Sure, it should get easier upon constant returns, but when you get to the point where you can blow up everything with tank rounds, how fun can it be to continue? Like mentioned before, this is an older title, so depending on what version you play, you'll have to endure all the cutscenes time and time again without being able to skip. There's only so many times I can hear Barry talk about a Jill sandwich and get a chuckle out of it. The replayability of this entry is girthy for the time of release, but nowadays you might want to leave it be for a while to get that fresh experience again. You knew this one was coming, and is yet another reason some, if not most, would prefer to play the remake. The controls of this RE involve the good old-fashioned tank controls. This is what you'll be wrestling with for the majority of your playthrough, as going from modern to tank can be quite daunting. Not only do you need to learn how to operate your survival in its obscure nature, but you have to damn near learn the camera angles of this game as well. Even though you'll be holding up to go forward, the camera could flip, keeping your player going in a straight line. This is great until you're facing towards the screen and realize that the movement is damn near in reverse due to the walking and or running direction being relative to the player's direction and not the camera. And you have to adapt to this on the fly. Enemies know how to move quite well and don't give a rat's ass if you're turning slow as fuck for a getaway. That's right, there's no quick turn here. So if you get too close to some chomping assholes, you can very easily see yourself taking unnecessary damage because of your limited movement. I think the worst offender to this is that the controls were intentional, just to make it more difficult for the player to maneuver during high stakes situations. Holding square to run isn't too bad, and holding R1 to aim is still in control schemes to this day. Naturally, you can't give the devs too much flack for this setup due to the limited controller makeup of the 5th console generation. But I will give their asses flack for having the original Japanese release including auto aim, but stripping it out when localizing it to the Western release. It's kind of like how they made the American release for DMC3's normal mode equal to hard mode, but here it feels like artificial difficulty. You already have to worry about preservation and item space, but you also have to consider how far you are from an item box. In this RE, like many others, you can't outright discard items. In fact, you can't even swap items to put them in another's place. If it's your first playthrough, there is pretty much no way to anticipate what items will be located where until you can do the process of elimination, and will lead to the eventual pack tracking to a safe room. And it's not like a discard function isn't in the game. When you've exhausted an item's usefulness, that's when the game will allow you to throw out an item, but only that specific item. It just feels like another one of those additions to add to the fear that seems more annoying than making situations tense. And to put the icing on a shit cake, if you play with Chris, you get to juggle all your items between his 6 slots versus Jill's 8. If you absolutely don't want to make the trek back to the item box, you could dump ammo or use herbs to open up spaces, but of course this is a waste of resources and could put you in a sticky situation which would have otherwise been manageable. There is a Resident Evil that lets you place items down, but oh boy, just you wait, we'll get to that. But what do you think? Maybe this fossil of a game has graphics that you just can't look past. Maybe you wish the latter half of the game had just as much exploration as the mansion. Let me know down below. Like and subscribe. I'm Saggy, and I'm also out.
Resident Evil 2.
Resident Evil 2 was an instant classic and solidified the IP as a franchise, but every masterpiece has its imperfections. I'm Saggy, and I'll be talking about the worst parts of RE2. The tank controls return, but aren't the true issue here. If you're playing this RE, then you've probably played the first one and are at least familiar with controlling your character. The problem arises when you're put in crazy situations that require maximum maneuverability while you're severely handicapped. The primary suspect would be the fact that there's no quick turn. In RE1, you very rarely would find yourself in a bout between more than 3 zombies, but here, you'll routinely run into halls with swarms of them, so you have to position yourself much more wisely. And then there's the bosses. Mr. X isn't too bad of an offender with his slow and lumbering nature, but once you get later into the game with these fast and deadly enemies, your slow turning will be your greatest adversary. Most of the areas traversed are quite small and or narrow like the first game, but there are more ferocious problems to encounter that make the movement much more cumbersome. This wasn't a prominent problem in the first game due to most enemies being grounded. Here though, you're introduced right at the start to an enemy that can crawl on walls and low profile your shots. It's manageable when you deal with 1 licker, but there are rooms that will have you facing upwards of 3. Spiders are similar, but are much more docile in comparison, but either way, you never want to waste shots, and sometimes aiming at the ceiling is a gamble that you most likely wouldn't want to take. I haven't even mentioned any bosses. For the most part, it's smooth sailing for the routine BOW shootout, but then you go up against Birkin, specifically G3 and 4. He's jumping all over the place and charging you, showcasing the movement and aiming working against you in tandem. You can blow him down while healing like a Dark Souls character, which is a way to circumvent the problem, but lets you ignore aiming and movement, perpetuating this point. Capcom kept many of the aspects of RE1 and expanded upon them in this game, but some content could have been left behind, all things considered. One of those legacy features is character swapping. For a brief period, you switch to Rebecca to save Chris in the previous game, but that's only one instance there. I guess they wanted to increase the involvement of the supporting cast, so Sherry and Ada get a few opportunities for just that, and it feels pretty tacked on. This was already planned to be in the game from the start, considering it was a part of RE 1.5, but the execution still leaves a lot to be desired. It isn't necessarily an issue of gameplay, but how their sequences factor into the overarching narrative. The Sherry sections could have for sure been axed with how contrived they come off as, and there's a single Ada section that really has a justifiable reason for existing. Leon doesn't even see Sherry more than twice, and Claire doesn't even meet Ada, ever, unless you include when she tosses a rocket launcher, which isn't canon. I appreciate the attempt to expand the game past the main protagonist, but we already have zapping. The other additions aren't needed. The game is solid in its own right, but when looking at it a bit too closely, you start to see where things are shaky. The most obvious example would be the interactions of Claire and Leon. These two are both in the RPD at one point, but almost never see each other. If Leon came into the building first, then why would Claire have to unlock doors, and vice versa? If you play Leon A, then he doesn't even get to see a tyrant at all, just Birkin. There's also the zapping system, which is also a great addition, but it's wishy-washy when and where it applies. For example, when you open the safe in the office, there are 2 items. Why isn't there an option to leave something for the other character here? A case could be made for this about any item, but the 2 characters have overlap, which would prevent this, which is a shame. Imagine needing to be wary of what ammo you pick up because the scenario B character would end up with a limited supply. Now you're actually thinking about your next run, instead of them being essentially disconnected. Speaking of disconnect, the canon story is almost hidden from the player. Usually you don't play a game and the true story sequence is locked behind beating the game twice beforehand, let alone being obscured by the order in which you play. It would be like if DMC5 let you start the game with any character, leading to different story beats, but not telling you which one is the official timeline. The effort to extend the replayability is appreciated, but I wish the continuity wasn't sacrificed in the process. But what do you think? Maybe you wished it was one continuous playthrough with no A-B scenarios. Maybe you wish you could play a short Marvin scenario a la The Fourth Survivor to see how he got bitten. Let me know below. Like and subscribe. I'm Saggy, and I'm also out.
Resident Evil.
Resident Evil had already created a space for itself as a hit series and only strengthened that point after RE2. And the next entry would come not too long after. Despite its praise, there are some rocky areas of this mountain. I'm Saggy, and I'll be going over the worst parts of RE3. This game makes a plethora of differences in the formula of the survival horror icon, and the entire structuring was no exception. Instead of 2 characters, this game opted for a single playable campaign, which was a first for the series and would continue this until RE6. This of course would mean a change in the length would be made to accommodate. When you beat RE1 or 2, the characters actually get different characteristics like obtaining exclusive weaponry or having easier navigation. Here though, everything is packed into a single campaign, so there's no differentiating factor for the player character in any run, only the run itself. In RE2, the campaigns are similar, but there are some quite noticeable changes between the two, like how you can play as Leon and never face Mr. X, or how you can beat Leon to the RPD and find Chris's note as Jill. RE3's campaign will have you play through the same predetermined scenarios, which can be slightly altered. More on that later. Top that off with the fact that you're almost bulldozing your way through hordes in this game makes everything feel accelerated. Not necessarily rushed, but definitely a faster feel, which I suppose was the objective, but it disrupts the slow pacing of the game. Without the second campaign, a single playthrough could be enough to satiate your desire to replay, as there's plenty of neat alterations to be made, but nothing crucial or imperative. RE2 gave a glimpse into where the series would take its gameplay, and in this game, it's at the pinnacle for this trilogy. The previous title included more rooms filled with threats, but this game adds family gatherings behind every other door. You still rummage and search through various obtuse areas and structures, but you're less suspenseful of what could be lurking in the next room, but more concerned with how much ammo you're about to dump, because you will for sure be shooting at some point. Don't get me wrong, this is fun as hell, especially when knocking down legions at a time, but it starts to stir the question, is this a Resident Evil game? This game was meant to be a different title in RE altogether before its shift into 3, but it was still a Resident Evil game title, unlike DMC and RE4. The game goes and doesn't stop until around the clock tower, where it starts to feel more traditional, but revs up yet again the moment that area has concluded. It's like if you took the chaotic and pressuring nature of RE2's prologue and made an entire game at that pace. You'll be finding more ammo than you'll be finding key items. The problem you'll have with this game's inventory is figuring out which guns you want to take into the mayhem and less about how to strategically prepare your bag with enough firepower and healing as well as key items. More actions added to the thrill of the game, but subtracts from the genre that is trying to sell itself as. I mentioned earlier that changes could be made during Jill's last escape that could alter your playthroughs. This is the live selection system, but most of you probably attach this sort of choice making to a Telltale game's formula. Since there's only a campaign with Jill, the live selection was added to give the game more replayability that would otherwise be absent. These choices are interesting to see play out and do create an intrigue as to what would have happened if you picked the other option, but when you complete the game, you'll realize that they'll all lead to the same general point, the illusion of choice. Most, if not all, of these choices have zero impact on the narrative and are here to give you some form of agency, but much of the time it doesn't feel like it's truly worth it. The first and greatest example is the first encounter with Nemi. Nemesis kills Brad, and you're given the choice to knock down Nemi or run into the RPD. If you kill Nemesis, he gives you a drop, and you're even able to take Brad's card, which can help accelerate your RPD stay. But those are the only changes. It's not like the choice changes whether Brad dies, or if killing Nemesis allows you to bypass the RPD altogether. Just some cool rewards, which isn't bad, but doesn't feel like a crazy selling point to rely on replayability. There's even an alternate way of executing it, which they do in this game. When playing as Carlos, you'll get a vaccine for a sick Jill, but right before you meet up with her, Nemesis pops up to stop you. This is a moment really similar to the first live selection, except there's no prompt. You can stay and take Nemi down, or hurry on to Jill. No scream pause necessary. Without the live selection, I'm less inclined to feel as though my choice of running away from Nemesis to Jill will have some sort of profound impact on the story. The live selection is a neat idea, that even blossomed into its own genre of games, but creating a sense of control by including negligible options is a downer. This is the last of the trilogy, and it does indeed still use tank controls, but that's not the issue here. There's more of a problem with the additions made around them. My biggest problem with the first two games was the mobility, and adding a quick turn in this game makes so much of a difference, especially in nail-biting situations. But that was the best addition. Along with the aiming button, additional forms were introduced which sound like quality of life changes. There's the ability to change targets, and the ability to aim at interactables, which aren't terrible add-ons in themselves, but the world around you will make these buttons battle against you. For example, the interactive aim is to be used for various explosives and such scattered across the game, but it also doubles as an aiming button naturally. You'll often find yourself trying to shoot a barrel to blow up, but the button literally designed for that purpose will just aim at a zombie instead. Then you have the dodge. Oh, the dodge. This is a great idea on paper that adds to the fast-paced idea injected into this game, but it's just flat out bad, unlike the other things. First of all, it's not clear exactly when you activate the dodge, which is abhorrently apparent against the most common adversary in the game, zombies. On top of that, you can't control what Jill does for the dodge. She'll push zombies most of the time, but with many other encounters, she can do a collection of evasive maneuvers, my favorite being the kneeling position she rolls into to fire more quickly. Too bad I can't control whether or not that's the dodge she commits to, and to put the shit icing on the piss cake, the dodge can be interrupted. Yeah, that's right, there's no invincibility frames on this shit. And some of the bitch ass enemies still get some iframes after recoiling from damage? If the tank controls prevented you from escaping sticky situations in the previous entries, then the auto aim and emergency escape will help you get into some in this one. But what do you think? Maybe you wish that Carlos had a separate campaign to show his journey. Maybe you wish that Nemi didn't telegraph his appearance right before he ambushes you. Let me know below. Like and subscribe. I'm Saggy, and I'm also out.
Resident Evil 4.
The iconic survival horror franchise would continue past the trilogy and revolutionize gaming once again, inspiring creations to this day. When you are the originator, however, there are bound to be areas that could be improved upon. I'm Saggy, and today I will be talking about the worst parts of RE4. Resident Evil up until this point had been known for its gruesome enemies, nerve-rattling situations, and most importantly, its horror factor. There was a point where people would be reluctant to play or even go near this title because it frightened them, similar to people who were being shocked by Mortal Kombat's grotesque visuals. Many aspects of what creates the survival horror experience still exist here, but with much less emphasis on being in a hopeless scenario and more about being a badass. The beginning of the end, I suppose. Leon goes from taking bullets to dodging that shit like Neo. You're jumping out of windows, suplexing the affected, quipping your way through the stress, etc. You never feel like you're in the shoes of someone who has questionable odds of living, but that your adversaries need to beware of you instead. Even as capable as Jill is, RE3 frames her escape as perilous and full of despairing circumstances. For example, Jill gets infected by the Nemesis parasite and is incapacitated until cured. Leon gets dealt a similar hand, but just keeps on trucking. Even when almost choking out Ada and coughing up blood, he moves as if nothing has changed. Your action hero man, surrounded by an environment of killing intent, fully capable of handling a small army of adversaries on your own. It's not survival horror anymore. it's a survival thriller. There's a reason for putting a less than qualified individual in these settings, because when you don't, there really isn't anything to fear. But it seems as though the original philosophy of RE will continue in the upcoming Requiem title, so we'll once more see the juxtaposition between the survival action of RE 4 through 3 and RE 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8. The series continues past the trilogy and creates a fresh experience with the perspective shift of the revolutionary over-the-shoulder camera, but funnily enough, keeps the tank controls despite wanting to redesign the gameplay. Huge warning: if you're coming off of playing modern third-person shooters or just modern games in general, you will feel supremely uncomfortable playing this game. In the OG trilogy, there is no control of the camera, so you focus mainly on shooting and movement. But now that the camera is tied to Leon's turning, this could actively dissuade modern players from wanting to play the game for more than maybe an hour. Another aspect of movement is, despite being John Wick here, your mobility is relatively limited outside of contextual events like dodging Verdugo. If you get too close to the enemy, your best mobility option is to quick turn and book it to create some distance. As shitty as Jill's dodge was in RE3, it could be executed at will instead of needing all of the dominoes to fall into place to execute it. Last but not least, a considerable gripe of many is that you can't move while shooting. You can backflip through lasers, but can't strafe while firing at Ganados. As you know, Devil May Cry started as RE4. That game lets you move and shoot, and it doesn't even have a free camera. They make Leon feel like Squidward when he gets turned to stone, but I will say, everything he does feels pretty weighty, from the kicks to the cranks. We love you, Ashley, but it's a love-hate relationship. There's nothing wrong with a damsel in distress, but the president's daughter creates many points of confusion in terms of her capabilities. Miss Graham can climb up ladders, but can't climb down. Ashley can use herbs when you play as her, but not when she's by your side. You want me to believe this bitch can operate a fucking bulldozer, but can't use a gun to help Leon? Speaking of playing as her, she has an entire inventory at her disposal, and her stingy ass doesn't help me hold shit. She doesn't even need to shoot, in a matter of fact. You can't just hold a couple shells for your security guard? She also suffers from Leon's Stone Man syndrome, but has almost no mobility, even when playing as her. Defending her isn't too much of an issue, but if you fail, prepare for the most irritating soundbites in gaming. You get to hear her exclaim the same 1.5 screams of distress throughout most of the game where she's present. Oh, you're a god gamer who never lets her get taken? Well, it matters not, because she has scripted segments of being captured, and when it's time to rip her from the enemy's clutches, prepare for your favorite voice lines. Help me, Leon. Why don't you help me? Good old QTEs. Back when developers didn't give a fuck about accessibility. Good times. All jokes aside, this shit was everywhere during this time and would be implemented on a dime, regardless of if it added to the game in a meaningful way. RE4 falls into the middle of this. Most action-oriented movement is relegated to QTEs, from climbing ladders to climbing El Gigante. There are many additions that are welcome and, most importantly, are optional, but then you have the cutscenes. I get that they want you to feel like you're involved, but it gets to a point of being borderline excessive. A classic example is the boulder chase. They give you a run button, but for this section, you're forced into a sequence where you tap buttons instead. Some of them are pretty quick as well, so if it's your first playthrough and you decide to take a drink of water, for example, at the wrong time, congratulations, you just died. We're already playing as the character, so trying to force it into the footage does not create a more exciting experience for most. And this isn't secluded to just this game. You have to take your concentration off the cutscene itself to focus on pressing buttons instead of enjoying what the developers have crafted, which is borderline counterintuitive. Along with many of the changes made in this entry, the inventory system would be taken into the shop to be tuned up as well. There are some neat alterations on display, but with 2 steps forward, it takes a couple steps backwards. You are the item box in this game, with an impressively upgraded amount of storage, but with the rate you acquire items, you'll find yourself feeling like you have the same size inventory as you did with one of our previous protagonists. The difference here is there's no way to offload your extra items, so they must be tossed or sold. This is compounded by the fact that there was a reduction in the maximum stack that bullets you can have, as well as items having more realistic sizing, so no more primarily 1 or 2 slot pickups. If you like to excessively hoard items, then I hope you like Tetris, because you'll be rearranging your items a lot to make sure everything fits, which creates this balancing act of managing what needs to be used as well as kept, which can be a turnoff. Furthermore, you know how you can just combine your ammo with your guns to reload in menu? Well, they decided to outright remove that from the game, most likely due to the addition of real-time reloading. But you know what they didn't add into the real-time gameplay? Hot swapping. There's no quick select or any way to pick a different weapon without going into the menu and equipping it. It could have easily been implemented to pull out a different weapon with the knife button and needing to equip the knife instead, like previous entries. DMC doesn't let you change guns in real time, but you can change your primary damage dealers, even if it is clunky. Additions such as the merchant are welcome with open arms, but there are some missteps that could have been taken under the microscope for further inspection. Characters in this game receive personalities to set the tone for who they are, but their development is lacking in some areas. Leon speaks of the Raccoon City incident and alludes to having PTSD, but never truly shows distress from it. It would have been cool to see some of the missing pieces of Leon's journey to this point, but all we get are nightmares of the Plaga within him, which could have been better as a nightmare of him turning in 1998. Luis's character is elaborated in many of the notes provided for him, but notes, like many items, are missable and players could just straight up not read them. He is an interesting individual that plays a major role in this entire scenario, but is subjected to the sidelines for most of his in-game involvement. Ashley stays unchanged through the entire endeavor, which I was hoping would change once it was her section, to show that she's ready to defend herself and not rely on others. But alas, the villains up until this point have mostly been mindless or invisible, such as the Tyrants or Umbrella. But here, we have Disney cartoon antagonists with henchmen, mandatory oversized trapdoors, and spiky ceilings, to name a few aspects. They still have some interesting elements about them, such as their backstories, but the game continuously makes you feel like they're a minimal threat. As Leon puts it, Saddler, you're small time. But what do you think? Maybe you would have liked to seen what the scrapped RE4 ideas could have turned into. Maybe you wish that Leon could have interacted with Wesker for the first time here. Let me know below. Like and subscribe. I'm Saggy, and I'm also out.
Resident Evil 5.
Resident Evil up to this point had been at it for over a decade by this point, and the series was about to undergo an even more drastic change than RE4. But change isn't always for the better. I'm Saggy, and I'll be going over the worst parts of Resident Evil 5. This one is either the biggest pro or biggest con in the game for most. For the first time in the franchise, Co-op is introduced and will influence whether this is one of the best RE experiences you can remember or one of the worst. Amongst other issues, playing this game solo is like loving your balls but then asking to be castrated. If you had issues with Ashley in RE4, don't dare step a foot into this campaign on your own. Not only do you get to play this poor man's Resi 4, but you have to do this with one of the worst types of AI models, the deliberately dumb. You can't give Sheva any valuable resources such as a good weapon because she'll blow through that shit with the most inefficient gunplay she can muster. You can't rely on her for advanced combat tactics. You can't even rely on her in sections where it's mandatory to split up sometimes. And I get it, they didn't want the AI to do all the work, but why program her to do almost nothing? At least with Miss Graham, I know she's useless, so her dying or getting captured is completely on you. Sheva has a fucking gun with the same melee capabilities as you, but acts like your 6-year-old brother behind the sticks. The only way to make her remotely viable is to manipulate her AI into supporting high ammo conservation by giving her strong yet minimal ammo, consuming bullets such as a rifle or a magnum if you dare. Coupled with a vest or two and a stun rod, and she can be your sharp shooting bullet sponge healer who can also double as a pack mule. RE4 rolled out and showed us a refreshing concept of the inventory system, which evolved the original formula while still feeling familiar. I suppose they decided against letting you be a walking item box a second time due to the co-op partner edition. I mentioned how you would use Sheva as a pack mule when running solo, and this game's rendition of the inventory is the primary reason. They want the game to be like RE4, but they give you an inventory like the original trilogy. One of the ongoing problems from the previous game continues here, where they decreased the maximum ammo stack, but that isn't the main issue. You see, despite still having lower stacking capabilities than the first 3, the stacks in the game go higher than RE4, but guess what? That shit doesn't matter. You have 9 inventory slots through the entire game, and 18 if you include your partner, but it's really only 16 because the bare minimum you will carry is a gun and ammo for that weapon. Remember in RE4 when you buy the tactical vest and it's a passive that reduces damage? Well, fuck that, because that was a dumb idea, right? Now you have to buy 2 separate vests that reduce melee and projectile damage respectively, and best of all, they take up an inventory slot. I will say that the game isn't difficult enough to warrant a purchase of either unless you want to make Sheva your tank and healer, but it's the principle. Sheva literally tells you in the first mission that you should give her anything you can't carry. So it sounds like they intentionally handicap you for the sake of keeping you on a leveled playing field when your adversaries, and yet they want you to play it as RE4 Part 2. Just another thing they saw in the previous game and asked, how can we make this worse? I hope you like bombastic, non-stop action because it starts at the wannabe Ganado village and keeps rolling from there. There really is no problem with a game of this style, but I want to know who wanted any of this from a Resident Evil game. 4 really did a number on the franchise and its identity, and it starts to rear its ugly head here. Yes, Resi 4 has quite a bit of action, but at least it's trying to include horror elements that would make your skin crawl. This game just doesn't give a fuck about any of that. The body horror on display is for the sake of showing you what onslaught of enemies you'll be facing next, and not to make you think, damn, that's kinda fucked up. Ricardo is the only person that really comes close to giving you that Resident Evil bioweapon feel, but it proceeds to be relegated to a glorified turret section. Remember El Gigante? Yeah, you fight him once and it's also a turret section. Most of the bosses, even Wesker, are super reminiscent of the mode from RE7 and 8, and if you know anything about them, you'll know how samey they start to be. This boss is a bug. This boss is a bigger bug. This boss is a tapeworm monster. This boss is a bigger tapeworm monster. But what about the normal enemies? Well, they are similar to Ganados, where they have some form of intelligence, but much less of the design. For example, when a Ganado wants to blow your ass up, you'll see him light a stick of dynamite, and if you can't see him, you'll hear him. Not in this game. They just chuck bombs at you, so I hope you're paying attention to him while he's off screen and you're taking care of the immediate threats before you. Also, like halfway through the game, they start throwing in these arenas where you can stick to a wall or barrier to fire back at the enemy, and it adds nothing but clunky interactions. And yes, I said fire back, because now your enemies get guns. I get that enemies are controlled by an advanced variation of the plaga that infected the villagers in 4, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired. It goes from a lackluster RE4 knockoff to a shitty Gears of War knockoff. Leon may not have been doing Raccoon City levels of mental gymnastics in Spain, but there's just about no puzzles in this game to be found, and if you come across one, it's some watered down Sesame Street problem that you'll forget about by the next chapter. If Resident Evil 4 is survival action, then this is just mindless action. QTEs were kinda in RE3 if you consider the live selection to be as such, and it truly developed in RE4. But here, they take that shit to the moon. In RE4, you did want to make sure you were on your toes in case of a prompt during a cutscene, but this game takes the cake. They're not hard necessarily, but they come out of nowhere sometimes, and you'll die just because you weren't expecting to have to press a button combo. And it's not like they constantly show up. They're almost randomly sprinkled throughout the game. Like the devs were like, this could be a good place for a QTE. Oh wait, we forgot we were doing those in this game. Let's add one here. I still have a problem with the real-time QTEs as well, because it's nonsensical to be attempting to create an action game, but force the player to wait until the game wants them to dodge to have the means to. They're like a parry, but shitty because it's never the same button. Take Wesker 1 for example. You let him run up on you and the prompt is square or your system's equivalent. Okay, so you'll be prepared for the next assault, right? False, because this fucker thinks this is MVC 3 and wants to hit you with a 50-50, so you have to guess whether it will be square or X within a frame or two. Okay, maybe that's the only one that was grinding my gears, but the QTEs in general aren't a problem secluded to me. Even though I could live without them, punching that damn boulder in the volcano will never get old. But what do you think? Maybe you wish the gameplay wasn't so linear and less of a shooting gallery. Maybe you wish that Wesker could have lived on to give one more good showing. Let me know below. Like and subscribe. I'm Saggy and I'm also out.
Resident Evil 6.
With the massive success of RE4 and 5, Capcom decided to go all in on the action-oriented design and pumped out another mainline entry. Yeah, I'm Saggy and I'll be going over the worst parts of Resident Evil 6. RE6 continues the direction of action that stems from RE5 and cranks it to hell. We get more enemies, more set pieces, more QTEs, more explosions, you name it. Since this is where Capcom unapologetically creates an action experience with this title, the gameplay has to be top notch, right? I guess it depends. All characters have a great deal of maneuverability and even special abilities such as Leon's dual wielding, but it's a hay and a needle stack. In the campaign at least, the game doesn't allow its mechanics to shine that well, and you're usually better off just running and gunning. Mercenaries shows you the potential of this game, but it's a fraction of the experience. At times, the game feels like they made Operation Raccoon City 2, or at least used the game as a baseline for what this game could look like. Is it a coincidence that they came out in the same year? Melee makes a return, but for the first time, you can melee enemies on command, and the finishers still do exist, but then you realize the combo enders use stamina. Yes, This game that so desperately wants to create this fast-paced string of gameplay limits your actions. The melee, the slide, and the dodging all cost some amount of stamina and can leave you vulnerable if empty. The game that doesn't even include a single save room wants to limit how much I kick the shit out of zombies. Yeah, okay. And I know someone will bring up the upgrading system, and I honestly don't know why. Upgrading the guns was fun and let you customize a weapon's performance based on your preferences. Here is just a firearm upgrade, more stamina, no reticle for more damage, no cool exclusive upgrades for guns, just upgrade basic stats ever so slightly. They were in those offices cooking up some shit with this game, and one of those shits was the story mode. The main design philosophy for RE5 and 6 was to outdo their predecessor, and I suppose splitting the campaign into 4 different slices was the best way to create this larger experience in their eyes. The different styles of play per character doesn't make each campaign completely foreign from one another, but the primary identity of the game is fractured the most in this title. It sprinkles the differences throughout each campaign, but lets you know within the same chapter that this is about action, which can cause the game to start feeling repetitive after the first playthrough. As much as I dislike the character swapping in DMC4, it is at least all in a single playthrough. I don't have to play through a needlessly drawn out alternative route, and the characters are actually quite different from one another other than both lugging around a broadsword. Speaking of lugging around, you know those key items you pick up to progress the game in some way to open a locked door to an unexplored part of the game? Well, that shit is essentially non-existent. You'll be placed in a controlled environment and made to complete some obligatory task, and you proceed to the next hallway. This also means that there are almost no puzzles. There are times where the game will have you placed in a controlled environment and made to complete some obligatory task, and you proceed to the next hallway. Sound familiar? No exploration, just go forward and that's it. It does, however, allow you to get glimpses of what other characters are doing during their campaign with the very cool story intersection feature, which was squandered on this game and only this game. We're back with another RE4 enhancement, the co-op. Now, RE5's campaign is not unbearable when playing single player, but it isn't an experience that you'd be begging to go back to. This really hasn't changed here. The gameplay problems are persistent whether you're playing single player or not. However, many of the problems in Resi 5 have been alleviated here. You don't need to manage your partner's inventory, and you don't need to feed them ammo constantly from them wasting it all because their rounds are infinite. The AI is not too bad in this one, but this game suffers greatly from not playing with others, making it arguably even worse to play single player than 5. I made a mention earlier about the story intersections, and this feature is golden in my opinion. You play your campaign up until a designated intersection between this campaign and another's. Once you've connected to another player, all of you get to play this specific part of the story sequence together, instead of an AI handling all the work. This feature could work in many different types of games, but it's yet another one of those things that started and ended here. I don't see many people talking about this, but this is borderline terrible. They made another adjustment to the inventory, and it was without a doubt for the worst. RE4 introduced a different, yet familiar attaché case, but it was dialed back in RE5. Here though, they went completely off script. Instead of being able to see your entire stash, you have to roll this carousel wheel around like a dial-up phone. For whatever reason, there's a horizontal and vertical wheel on this shit instead of just being 2 horizontal wheels, or maybe no fucking wheels at all. Then they updated the herbs. I guess Capcom didn't want to show how traditional herbs are ingested, so now you have tablets. Each tablet replenishes your health by 1. In this game, they scrapped the health bar and now you have these pips, so you no longer take a herb to heal up, but multiple. There's no pop 5 at once where you can instantly heal anymore. You have to fill up your hand with a designated amount that you want to heal. Then you can heal. And mixing is almost meaningless. You get green and red tablets throughout the game, and mixing green and red just gives you more green. No green plus red mix, just more green. The guns still have a shortcut, thank God, but they managed to butcher it from the last game. You have to select the gun on the shortcut wheel and cycle through your list. Remember in RE5 where you could just press a single direction and have the firearm of your choice? Well, fuck you. That doesn't exist anymore. But what do you think? Maybe you wish the entire campaign played like Mercenaries. Maybe you wish you could have seen some of the more abstract characters reappear, like Ark Thompson. Let me know below. Like and subscribe. I'm Saggy, and I'm also out.
Resident Evil 7.
After almost half a decade, Capcom revisited one of their most iconic franchises for a refreshing revival, but with a new take comes new challenges. I'm Saggy, and I'll be going over the worst parts of RE7. With a new game, Capcom wanted to give us an entirely new character, which isn't uncommon for the series. What is uncommon is the characterization of our fresh protagonist. Ethan makes his way through this game relatively smoothly, almost akin to some battle-hardened vet. Something outlandish will happen right in front of him, and he won't make as much as a peep. You wander around these grotesque environments, trudging your way through many sorts of disturbing scenes and creatures, digging into disgusting pits of filth, but Ethan is as calm as a meditating monk. It's like they wanted to put a silent protagonist in the game, but didn't want the player interactions to be too awkward, so they put an awkward ass civilian instead. Of course, Mr. Winters isn't completely silent, but it feels so out of place when you blow a man's head off and get a reaction, but digging in a dead man's neck is just a walk in a park. The silent treatment falls apart when the player's supposed to be the average Joe. We don't even get to see the guy's face, so even if he was so scared that he was speechless, we couldn't even tell, but knowing this fucker, his face is probably as blank as his reactions through it all. I'm not saying he needs to be cracking one-liners like Leon, or bringing all the testosterone like Chris, but damn, would it have been better to consistently get some personality out of the guy instead of it being sprinkled throughout the game. Capsule computers aren't strangers to creating some banger enemies, and to be honest, the best ones are simple but effective. Here, however, I think they went a bit too simple. The primary enemy in this game is the Molded, and they have to be the most boring, cookie-cutter set of adversaries in the series. Your first encounter may be exciting, albeit unsettling, but after the 20th battle with these fuckers, reality starts to set in that this is it. You have your basic Molded, your wannabe Liquor, then you get the Wesker clones, and of course, you can't forget the tried and true bloated zombie, Will Molded. Before you even leave the Baker house, you would have seen a third of the enemies already. I always hate when games cheap out and just reskin enemies for new areas, but I never thought a game would make me appreciate that shit. They try to be clever and spawn and Molded with various amounts of missing limbs, but it's the same enemy at the end of the day. And I get it, zombies aren't too different, but at least they don't all blend together. These bastards are the same color and material as the walls sometimes, which is thematically cool, but not aesthetically, especially after 8 hours of it. Bosses are fine, except they hide Lucas behind DLC, because of time constraints I guess. And maybe you don't like Evie's final battle, but come on, at least there's an RE2 reference in there. As if to show us the direction of the franchise would shift, Capcom gave us a more intimate camera perspective for the first time in a mainline entry, the first-person camera. This one is a toss-up. Series veterans may be uncomfortable with the shifting camera, while newcomers may not have a problem at all. Over the years, however, a common stance on the gameplay is that it feels like an indie horror game equipped with the walking simulator. The similarities are there, but this can primarily be attributed to the camera, as it lends itself heavily to the searching aspect of the game. There is hardly movement tech to be found for Ethan, due to him moving like a solid rock, but it makes you rationalize your movement decisions instead of moving through every encounter like you're using Dante's Trickster. This slow movement doesn't just slow Ethan down, but as the encounters become more involved, it slows you down. Letting enemies out of your sight could spell death, due to how stiff you are and your vision is subjected to only what's in front of you, so special awareness is key to make sure you don't bump into walls and such. Speaking of awareness, you have to be sure to check every nook and cranny or you could be missing valuable resources. And I mean check. You never know where an item will be, so checking under that tilted painting may reward you. Many of these compounding points may not only turn off the FPS haters, but also those who can't handle a slower paced RE. When you start Ethan's journey, you get a grand introduction and a setup for your next step, the Baker's house. This entire area is a culmination of what makes a Resident Evil game. You have the decrepit environment, suppressive enemies, limited ammo, and even a stalker enemy to keep you on your toes. Drizzling some RE3 crafting mechanics, and the starting area feels golden. Once you leave the house, however, things start to take a turn for the worse. You get a sneak peek of Marguerite's area through Mia, but don't know you can go there until you leave the Baker home. And man, is it a downgrade. The molded aren't what you'll be worried about. It'll be some lame ass bugs. Of course they're flying, because we all love us a good flying enemy in RE. You navigate the area while avoiding Bug Mama, but the area is much more claustrophobic, with much less ground to cover. Once you take care of whatever this is, you move on to Lucas, who almost doesn't even have an area and is composed of many corridors. Like mentioned before, you don't even get to fight Lucas in the main game, you just move on. And then there's the ship. Boy, oh boy, the ship. So you go into the ship as Mia and are tasked with finding Ethan, but naturally you're stripped of everything and have to rebuild your inventory again. This is where the game truly starts to feel like padding. Despite explaining Mia's background and the mystery around her disappearance, the gameplay section is a chore. They thought this section was so great that you're given a tape to play through the entire ship level in the past in order to get clues for the present, which you play through again. It's all very tiresome and leaves you wanting to go back to the milquetoast that is Ethan. But what do you think? Maybe you wish there were more series references. Maybe you wish that they had mercenaries with all types of playable characters. Like and subscribe. I'm Saggy, and I'm also out.
Resident Evil.
The Resident Evil franchise, with its renewed success, would continue their victory lap with even more slappers. But how much of it is a slap in the face? I'm Saggy, and I'll be going over the worst parts of Resident Evil 8. With this being a sequel, you'd think it would take what made the previous title great and expand upon it. Well, RE8 sorta does this, but alters the formula to something akin to RE4. 7 was an intimate experience that focused more on the horror aspects, like the original trilogy, and 8 shifts the core gameplay into a linear, action-packed adventure, like RE4. One of the first encounters you face is against an onslaught of foes in an abandoned village, like RE4. You eventually come across a shop that lets you buy items and upgrade guns, like RE4. Hell, you even get a totally not attaché case with the temporary inventory, like you know who. There are just so many examples of this game taking from 4 and throwing it in your face, almost as if to nostalgia bait. Hey, remember Del Lago? Well, take a look at this. It would have been nice to have seen this entry be its own thing for the most part, and not scarecrow together fan service. This game suffers from a similar fate as the previous with its locations, and it's a shame that wasn't something that was polished. Once you're through what is essentially the prologue, you have to move around the map through 4 locations total, starting with the castle. Lady D's abode is reminiscent of the Baker House, where you're exploring the building to find key items to progress. You know, typical survival horror shit. But after you dispatch Alcina, you move on to the next area, and this is where it starts to sour a bit. The castle offers the best survival horror experience, while the rest of the locations present much less and are far more linear. You still find the key items, but there's almost no choice in the order they are acquired. This is where the RE4-ness really kicks in, and you either love it or hate it, just like back in the day. If every location was as in-depth and exploration-driven as the castle, the different environments would for sure be more memorable, but as they stand, they feel more like a means to an end rather than areas of substance. We can try and look past the many faults of how the narrative plays out, but there's no denying there are more negatives than positives. If you thought the previous game had some silly fantasy bullshit going on with the telepathic mold, well, buckle your fucking seatbelt, because this game takes that shit to the moon and beyond. Let's address the elephant in the room. Chris decides in order to protect Ethan, he'll leave him in the dark about the entire situation that he is practically at the center of. Imagine someone blows up your house and just tells you that the reason doesn't concern you. The fuck you mean it doesn't concern me? I was living there. And it's not like Chris isn't given multiple opportunities to fill Big E in. He just makes an executive decision not for the sake of the plot. Even without Ethan and Rose's transportation to the safe location being compromised, why would he leave him in the dark about his own fucking wife? Because Miranda might have him under her control? Considering they knew Miranda's identity when they pumped her full of lead, they wouldn't have been able to spot Ethan in the same manner? Then you have Miranda herself, and her lackeys, of course. It's a classic case of too many chefs in the kitchen. There are 5 total antagonists, so of course not all of them will get the spotlight they deserve, especially in a game that likes to drip feed info through found notes. Going back to the point made about the castle, Lady Dimitrescu feels the most complete, with the others almost feeling like filler. Instead of killing her off in the castle, wouldn't it have been better to allow the player to leave the castle and search for more items while she stalks you through the various parts of the village? Since she's the only stalker in the game, other than that fucking baby, your reprieve would come from entering the other lords' domains, which would be their own castle, so to speak, but wishful thinking, I suppose. I just wish the 4 lords were more prominent so they don't feel like another box checked off in completing the game. culmination of what takes this game down a couple notches is the linearity. It's a point that can't be overstated and has been echoed 1,000 times. The castle is the best part. The devs clearly listened to the feedback about the first entry and softened the blow in many areas, such as Ethan being as interesting as blank paper, or the prologue being damn near an hour of slow build-up, but they almost doubled down in other aspects. One of the major points of contention was in 7 after the house was overcome. The game provides less exploration and puzzles to eventually become a chore to finish by the boat. The game never slows down too much or becomes a slog, but some of that unironically might be the issue. There are puzzles to be found in the game, but absolutely nothing on par with the Lucas area, and nothing really sticks with you. In 7, you find a tape where you play as Mia for like 5 minutes, but it reveals a future area that piques your interest and can in time make your way there. Almost no part of the game gives you this foreshadowing. The most you get is notes and this one section where you run through a cave sequence of lichens chasing you and visit that cave once more near the end of the game. For the most part, areas will play out the same, and the most diversity you will get is in the exploration of the village, which isn't mandatory, and the castle, which lets you search for masks. But what do you think? Maybe you actually liked Ethan and wanted an interaction with more than just Chris. Maybe this take on the survival horror genre is your cup of tea over the slow burn experience. Let me know below. Like and subscribe. I'm Saggy, and I'm also out.
Resident Evil.
Our beloved bioweapon slang series comes back yet again to show us evil's name, but is that evil starting to seep into what makes the franchise a hit? I'm Saggy, and I want to go over the worst parts of Resident Evil 9. I've mentioned before how Capcom has no problem with introducing new characters, but usually the new characters that hit the mark are the pro tags, and this title follows that same pattern. The last time we were given competent antagonists was in 7, and even then, Evelyn pales in comparison to the Baker family in her own game. Here we see an apprentice of Spencer get his day in the sun, and it starts off promising enough, but he really just boils down to watch out every move and continuously struggle with capturing Grace and ending Leon, similar to RE4's Saddler. It's cool that he worked under Oswald and continues his most recent research, but that's about the only thing that's really intriguing about him. Wesker is barely even seen in RE4 unless you play Assignment Ada, but he still manages to be more compelling. Speaking of Wesker, let's talk about the other blonde. So, the ripoff Zeno somehow is even less interesting than Victor. At least we know who this cracked skin fuck is and what he's been up to. Who the fuck is this guy though? He comes off as cool when he has a moment eradicating a few soldiers and doing Wesker Matrix shit, but his cool factor is surface level at best and gets dry quick when there is no real reason to connect him to as any antagonist. Most of his screen time is near the tail end of the game, and it isn't enough time to make him a character to care about or even remember other than the fact that he's not Wesker. They also introduce another character to magnify the cruelty of the villains, Emily. Now I'm not saying she should have been killed off after solving the Braille puzzle, but the underground segment with unlocking her cell is borderline padding. Hell, her being here feels like it's solely to give the player a reference to Alyssa or Grace adoption dynamic revealed at the end. I don't believe Emily to be a complete miss, however, due to her emphasizing Grace's humanity by giving Junior Ashcroft a way to redeem herself in a way because of her feeling like Alyssa's death was her fault, similar to Leon and his remorse stemming from Raccoon City. See, the main characters are pretty spot on, but the baddies always manage to fry my hide. Considering this game is going for a greatest hits approach to the overall experience, a divide is bound to happen one way or another, and what better place to have this divide than the core gameplay? The settings are relatively flexible and allow you to switch camera perspectives on the fly, but that's pretty much where the autonomy ends. They essentially took RE7 and 4 Remake and bashed them together into one borderline disjointed experience. Grace's sections are slow and tense, while Leon's sections are fast and bombastic. The juxtaposition between these two types can be staggering, especially when the character switch happens where you go from creeping around your adversaries and reserving resources to actively running into danger and blowing your enemies' faces off. Neither style lacks in their department per se, but you do feel that the game feels split and it's almost two games in one. This can be felt the most in the care center. You do a run through the facility as Grace with the RE7 style play, and when it's Kennedy's time to shine, you go through the same areas but with the 4R style, and it's such a mode flip that it makes you wonder how the rest of the game will play out. This is an entire section for Grace, but Leon moves through it in minutes. To compensate for his speed, the devs sprinkle many smaller portions of the Boy Wonder in between the Ashcroft sections and lead up to the Raccoon City area, which has to be extensive so it doesn't feel short. One can only ponder how the game would have panned out if one gameplay type was settled on for the majority of the title. This is a hit or miss for most. However you want to put it, the game leans heavily on nostalgia, particularly in the Raccoon City section and onward naturally. This game is an ode to the franchise and starts off with an Outbreak character of all things, but doesn't really crank that shit up until later. This is a problem that was present in 8, where they constantly wanted to shove things in the game to remind you of RE4, like the wannabe Del Lago, and even in 6 with the constant references to RE2 and Leon's campaign. This game does that, but for the memory of RE2 and 2R. In 8, the moments were more spread out, and in 6, most of them were just dialogue. But it's much more noticeable here because it's concentrated at the end of the game, which will be the most fresh on most people's mind. We saw the police station in the trailers, but they also bring back spiders, plants, lickers, and even tyrants. They even go as far as to bring back the shitty nemesis at the end of RE3R as the final boss. Oh, and of course you can't forget the Grim Reaper himself, Hunk. But just like many of the other enemies, he's shoehorned in for like 5 minutes to make you go, oh shit, and not necessarily, that's cool. It would have been better to sprinkle a couple of the guys here and there and between new adversaries to keep the experience fresh for old and newcomers alike, while still keeping that good old nostalgia intact, but I digress. Now I won't lie, I don't believe you should be coming into an RE game with super high expectations for some deep and Shakespearean storytelling, but there is certainly a limit to how nonsensical something can get before it becomes a problem. One of the biggest problems here are the retcons they introduced. Capcom loves their retcons, but these aren't the greatest in a country mile. Why the Spencer change? Other than to fit the game's narrative. Go look at the scene where Wesker smokes his ass in 5, and then watch the scene of his interview with Alyssa, and tell me how this retcon is a good one. Did he have a change of heart, then go, Nah, that was a dumb phase. With this change, there are several areas that come into question of whether they are changed to fit this new ideology as well. Then you have this weak ass choice ending. I guess it's a homage to RE7, but it was bad and unneeded there, and it's bad and unneeded here. One ending is clearly the bad one, with literally no effort or payoff put into the other than to show the player this choice sucks and you're dumb for picking it. While the other is so much more involved and obviously canon that it begs the question, why even waste resources making and including it? The final objective of the game is to destroy Elpis, so why make it the bad choice and not just completely omit it? I guess that small ass snippet of Spencer is supposed to make your decision as the player different. This might be the worst aspect of the game because of how little it adds to the game. You don't even get to fight the final boss with the bad ending, not even as a Grace specific boss to make the choice more interesting. Just another addition that should have never left the brainstorming phase. But what do you think? Maybe you would have liked to see Claire get some shine after years of being MIA, especially in a game that is connected to her as much as Leon. Maybe you would have liked to seen another merchant for old time's sake instead of a COD mystery box. Let me know below. I'm Saggy and I'm also out.